Pyramids. Ancient Egyptians built pyramids, massive stone structures, perfectly aligned to cardinal directions, tombs for god-kings. Ancient Mayans built pyramids, massive stone structures, perfectly aligned to cardinal directions, temples for priest-kings. These cultures were separated by the Atlantic Ocean. They never met. They never communicated. They had zero contact. Yet they built the same thing. The Egyptian pyramids were constructed around 2700 BCE. The Great Pyramid of Giza went up around 2560 BCE. The Mayans started building pyramids around 1000 BCE, over 1500 years later. No possible contact between them during these time periods. The Atlantic was an impassable barrier. But look at what they created. Both cultures built stepped or smooth-sided pyramids requiring insane engineering. Both aligned their pyramids to true north with almost zero error. The Great Pyramid is off by only 3/60th of a degree. Mayan pyramids show the same precision. Both used astronomical observations to achieve this. Neither knew the other existed. Both used pyramids for the same purpose, consolidating power through monuments that demonstrated control over massive labor forces. Egyptian pyramids were tombs. Mayan pyramids were temples. But the function was identical, connecting rulers to the gods through architecture. The construction techniques were nearly identical. Egyptians used massive limestone blocks fitted precisely together. Mayans used limestone rubble with precisely fitted facing stones. Both moved multi-ton stones using ramps and levers. Both achieved precision that modern builders struggle to match. Here's where it gets weird. Some pyramids encode the same mathematics. The Great Pyramid's dimensions approximate pi, the ratio of base perimeter to twice the height. Certain Mayan pyramids contain similar mathematical relationships. Both cultures embedded advanced math into stone monuments. The standard explanation? Convergent evolution. Pyramids are the most stable shape for building tall stone structures, wide base, tapering sides. Any culture trying to build as tall as possible with available technology would eventually arrive at a pyramid. But that doesn't explain the identical details, the cardinal alignment, the mathematical encoding, the similar construction methods, the same social function. That's not convergent evolution, that's identical innovation. Other cultures built pyramids too. Nubians in Sudan, ancient Chinese, Mesopotamian ziggurats, the Cahokia Mound in North America. Pyramids appear everywhere. Ancient civilizations built monuments. Either there's something fundamental about the pyramid form that humans independently recognize, or there was contact between ancient cultures we don't know about, or something else is happening that we don't understand. Writing systems. Writing was invented independently at least 4 times. Sumerian cuneiform around 3200 BCE. Egyptian hieroglyphs around 3200 BCE. Chinese characters around 1200 BCE. Mesoamerican writing around 900 BCE. These systems developed with zero contact between cultures. Chinese writing developed thousands of miles from the Middle East. Mesoamerican writing developed on a completely different continent. Here's what's impossible. They all evolved the same way. Every system started with pictures. Draw a bull, it means bull. Draw water, it means water. Pictographic writing. That makes sense. But then they all did the same thing. They evolved from pictures of things to symbols for sounds. This progression isn't obvious. A writing system could stay pictographic forever, but every single independent writing system evolved phonetic components. More specifically, they all invented rebus writing, using a picture of an object to represent a sound instead of the object. Picture of an eye meaning the sound I instead of the body part. This exact technique appears in Sumerian, Egyptian, Chinese, and Mayan writing. These cultures never met. They all developed syllabaries or alphabets, systems where symbols represent sounds you can combine to write any word. The Phoenician alphabet, Indian scripts, Ethiopian script, all independently figured out that representing sounds is more flexible than representing objects. Even the structure converged. Most systems developed ways to show tense, number, gender. Different symbols or markers for past versus present, singular versus plural. These grammatical markers evolved independently across completely isolated writing systems. The aesthetics converged. Most early writing went in columns or rows, not spirals or random placement. Most developed directional conventions, right to left to right, top to bottom. Different directions, but consistent direction within each system. Even the number of symbols converged. Alphabets cluster around 20 to 30 characters. Syllabic systems have 50, 100. Logographic systems have hundreds to thousands. These ranges match cognitive limits on what humans can memorize and use efficiently. The explanation? Human brains process language the same way everywhere. There are only so many ways to represent speech as visual symbols. Successful writing systems converge on similar solutions because of universal cognitive constraints. But the specific similarities are disturbing. The rebus principle, the evolution from pictographic to phonetic, the grammatical encoding methods. Either there's a universal structure all human languages share, or information spread much further than we know, or language and cognition inevitably produce specific writing features. Agriculture. Agriculture was invented independently in at least 7 places: the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 BCE, China around 9,000 BCE, Mesoamerica around 8,000 BCE, the Andes around 8,000 BCE, Sub-Saharan Africa around 5,000 BCE, Eastern North America around 4,000 BCE, New Guinea around 7,000 BCE. No contact between these regions during the relevant periods. Agriculture appeared independently across the world within a few thousand years, after 200,000 plus years of humans not inventing it at all. What's identical isn't just plant seeds and harvest crops. It's the specific techniques. Every region independently discovered selective breeding, saving seeds from the best plants, gradually domesticating wild species into crops. This requires understanding heredity and planning across generations. Every agricultural center figured this out separately. Multiple regions independently invented polyculture. Mesoamericans grew corn, beans, and squash together, the 3 sisters. Beans fix nitrogen for corn, squash provides ground cover against weeds. This specific 3-crop ecological system was reinvented independently using different plant species but identical principles. Every center independently invented irrigation within centuries of adopting agriculture. Sumerians built canals. Chinese developed irrigation systems. Mesoamericans created chinampas. All realized independently that controlling water increases yields. Crop rotation, planting different crops in sequence to maintain soil fertility, was discovered independently multiple times. This requires understanding that different plants deplete different nutrients. Not obvious. Yet multiple cultures figured it out separately. Food storage, granaries, pottery, preservation techniques developed independently everywhere agriculture existed. The transition to farming required storing surpluses. Every culture independently solved this problem. Fermentation, using microorganisms to preserve food and make alcohol, appears in nearly every agricultural society. Bread, beer, wine, cheese, yogurt, kimchi. The products differ. The principle is identical, discovered independently worldwide. Here's the disturbing part. Specific crop domestication followed identical paths despite using completely different plants on different continents. Teosinte barely resembles modern corn. Domesticating it required selecting for larger kernels, more kernels per cob, softer seed coats over thousands of years. Mesoamericans did this independently. Wheat domestication in the Fertile Crescent followed the exact same trajectory. Wild wheat has brittle stems that shatter when ripe. Domesticated wheat has tough stems. The same selective pressure, choosing plants that didn't shatter, produced the same result on a different continent with a different plant. Rice domestication in China, same pattern. Wild rice shatters. Domesticated rice doesn't. Independent invention of identical techniques. The timeline is suspicious. Agriculture invented in multiple locations within a few thousand years, all around 10,000, 8,000 years ago, after 200,000 years of humans existing without it. Either climate change after the Ice Age enabled agriculture everywhere simultaneously, or humans reached some cognitive threshold, or there was far more contact than we know. Zero and positional notation. The concept of zero was invented independently at least 3 times. Babylonians around 300 BCE, Mayans around 4 CE, Indian mathematicians around 500 CE. No contact between these cultures, separated by oceans and thousands of years. All three invented the same thing, not just zero as an idea, but zero as a placeholder in positional notation. This is sophisticated mathematics that's not remotely obvious. Positional notation means a digit's position determines its value. 2 means 2. 20 means 20. The position changes the value. This requires a symbol for nothing to hold empty places. Babylonians developed base 60 positional notation. They needed a placeholder for empty positions. They invented a symbol meaning nothing here, 0. This let them distinguish 60, 160 01s from 1060s 11. Mayans independently developed base 20 positional notation. Same problem. They invented a shell symbol for 0. Same solution. No contact with Babylonians. Indian mathematicians independently developed base 10 positional notation, the system we use. They also invented 0. But unlike Babylonians and Mayans, who used it mainly as a placeholder, Indians developed 0 as a number you could calculate with. All three cultures faced identical mathematical problems. All three invented identical solutions. A symbol for nothing that holds places in notation. The rules converge too. All three independently figured out adding 0 doesn't change a number. Multiplying by 0 gives 0. These aren't obvious. They're sophisticated mathematical insights requiring careful thought. The evolution from placeholder to number also happened independently. Mayans and Indians both eventually treated 0 as a number you could operate on, not just a placeholder. Parallel conceptual development. Even the philosophy converged. Indian mathematicians wrote about 0's relationship to nothingness and infinity. Mayan inscriptions show cosmological significance. Both recognize 0 represented something beyond mathematical convenience. 0 is pure abstraction. There's nothing in nature that is 0. No physical thing represents it. Yet multiple isolated cultures invented this abstract concept and embedded it in mathematics using nearly identical principles. The explanation? Positional notation inevitably requires 0. Any culture developing sophisticated math will invent it eventually. But that doesn't explain why the specific properties and philosophical understanding converge so precisely. Mummification. Ancient Egyptians mummified their dead, famous for it. Elaborate preservation techniques, wrapped bodies, tomb goods. The Chinchorro culture in South America also mummified their dead. Starting around 5000 BCE, predating Egyptian mummification by over 2,000 years. No contact, different continents, separated by oceans. Both independently decided to preserve bodies. Both developed similar techniques. Desiccation, removing moisture to prevent decomposition. Egyptians used natron salt. Chinchorro used the dry coastal climate and minerals. Different methods. Same principle. Remove water, preserve tissue. Evisceration, removing internal organs that decompose fastest. Egyptians removed organs through specific incisions. Chinchorro disassembled and reassembled entire bodies. Different techniques. Same understanding that removing organs aids preservation. Wrapping, protecting mummies with textiles. Egyptians used elaborate linen patterns. Chinchorro used reeds and textiles. Different materials based on local availability. Same protective principle. Positioning, deliberate body positions. Often fetal positions or crossed hands. Different cultures, different specific positions. But ritual positioning was universal. Grave goods, objects buried with the dead for the afterlife. Egyptians filled tombs with everything from food to furniture. Other mummifying cultures buried tools, weapons, personal items. The goods reflected culture. The principle emerged independently. Mummification isn't practical. Natural decomposition is rapid. Preserving bodies requires massive effort and resources. No obvious benefit. The dead don't serve the living. yet multiple isolated cultures invested enormous resources doing it. This suggests similar beliefs about death emerging independently. The assumption that physical bodies remain important after death, that preserving them serves some purpose. This belief appeared in completely separated cultures. The sophistication converged. Egyptian mummification evolved over thousands of years, from simple burials to elaborate preservation. Chinchorro mummification followed a similar developmental path despite being independent. Even the failures were similar. Early attempts showed identical problems: incomplete desiccation, improper evisceration, inadequate protection from scavengers. The solutions also converged: better desiccating agents, more complete organ removal, sealed burial chambers. Natural mummies might explain some of this. Bodies occasionally mummify naturally in dry or cold conditions. Discovering naturally preserved bodies might inspire deliberate mummification, but that doesn't explain why techniques converged so precisely, or why the belief that bodies need preservation appeared independently multiple times. The wheel. The wheel was invented twice, only twice in all of human history. Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, first for pottery, then for transportation. From there it spread throughout Eurasia and Africa through contact and trade. Mesoamerica invented it independently, but only for toys, small clay animals with wheels. They understood the wheel concept. They just never used wheels for anything practical. Why? No large domesticated animals to pull carts. Horses, oxen, other draft animals existed in Eurasia, not in the Americas. Without animals, wheeled transportation wasn't useful. But they didn't use wheels for pottery either, or milling grain, or any other non-transport purpose. Potters' wheels make pottery production easier and faster. Yet Mesoamericans made all pottery by hand despite knowing about wheels. What's identical is the wheel design itself. Both cultures independently created circular objects rotating around axles. Same mechanical principle. Mesopotamian transportation wheels and Mesoamerican toy wheels operate identically. The cognitive leap is what matters. Rolling logs can move heavy objects. Lots of cultures use log rollers, but wheels aren't obvious. Transitioning from rollers to wheels requires understanding that a circular object rotating independently around a fixed axle could be useful. This is mechanically complex. Both cultures made this jump independently. Both understood rotation around a central axle. Mesopotamians exploited it. Mesoamericans made toys. But the core invention was identical. Some researchers think wheels were invented more times, but the evidence rotted. Wood decomposes quickly. Other cultures might have invented wheels that didn't survive. But even with just two known inventions, the wheel demonstrates that extremely specific mechanical innovations can happen independently. Wheels aren't obvious. They're sophisticated devices requiring understanding of rotational motion, bearings, and axles. Yet cultures separated by oceans invented them identically. Metallurgy. The Bronze Age began independently in multiple locations. Near East around 3300 BCE, China around 2000 BCE, Southeast Asia around 2000 BCE, South America around 1000 CE. No contact during initial development. Different continents, separated by oceans, all followed the identical metallurgical progression. First, native metals, naturally occurring pure gold, copper, silver. Shiny metal rocks you can hammer into shapes. Every metallurgical culture started here. Then annealing, discovering that heating and hammering metal makes it stronger. This prevents work hardening and cracking. Not obvious. You have to accidentally discover heated metal behaves differently. Every culture figured this out independently. Smelting, heating certain rocks produces metal. This requires reaching specific temperatures and controlled fires. Not obvious at all. Yet cultures worldwide independently discovered that specific heavy rocks melt into useful metal. Alloying. Mixing metals creates superior materials. Bronze is copper plus tin, harder than pure copper. All Bronze Age cultures independently discovered this specific alloy. Tin is relatively rare. Different regions found different tin sources, but all recognized that adding tin to copper created better metal. Lost wax casting, creating wax models, encasing in clay, melting out wax, pouring in metal. This creates complex hollow metal objects, invented independently in the Near East, China, South America, and West Africa. It's sophisticated and multi-step, yet invented identically multiple times. Even specific tools converged. Axes with socket holes for handles, same design independently in multiple places. Swords with similar blade geometries. Armor using overlapping scales or plates. Bells using similar shapes. The chemistry of metallurgy is universal. Iron behaves the same everywhere. But the techniques aren't obvious. Cultures had to discover, through experimentation, that specific temperature ranges work best. Different ores need different processing. Adding flux helps refine metal. Quenching hardens steel. Tempering prevents brittleness. All these techniques discovered independently multiple times. Metallurgical development followed nearly identical paths worldwide. This suggests limited successful approaches to working metal. Different cultures converge on the same solutions, because those solutions work best given chemistry and available tools. Astronomy and Calendars. Egyptians, Babylonians, Mayans, and Chinese all independently developed sophisticated astronomy and calendars. No contact between them. All independently discovered, the solar year is approximately 365 days. Egyptians used 365-day calendars with 12 30-day months plus 5 extra days. Mayans used 365-day calendars with 18 20-day months plus 5 extra days. Same year length through independent observation. All independently discovered, the lunar month is approximately 29.5 days. Babylonians, Chinese, Mayans all calculated the moon's cycle accurately through years of careful observation. All independently discovered, Venus has a specific cycle. Mayans tracked Venus with extraordinary precision, tables predicting its movements over decades. Babylonians tracked Venus independently. Both considered it religiously significant, despite requiring decades of observation to map its full cycle. All independently developed leap year concepts. The solar year is slightly longer than 365 days. The Julian calendar added leap days every 4 years. Mayan calendars had more complex leap systems. Both realized independently that 365-day calendars drift relative to seasons and created corrections. All independently oriented structures to astronomical events. Stonehenge aligns to solstices. Egyptian temples align to star risings. Mayan pyramids align to equinoxes. Chichen Itza creates a serpent shadow only on equinoxes. Chinese architecture was oriented astronomically. All cultures independently decided aligning buildings to celestial events mattered. All independently created star catalogs and constellation systems. Different cultures divided the sky differently. Different constellations, different myths. But mapping stars into memorable patterns emerged independently worldwide. All independently predicted eclipses, mathematically sophisticated. Requires tracking cycles over many years. Babylonians predicted lunar eclipses using the Saros cycle, approximately 18 years. Mayans discovered similar eclipse cycles independently. Both achieved this through generations of observation. The convergent precision is remarkable. Noticing the moon has phases is easy. Calculating its cycle to 29.53 days requires patience and math. Multiple cultures independently achieved this precision. The uses of astronomy converge too, determining agricultural timing, creating religious calendars for festivals, legitimizing rulers through astronomical knowledge, navigation using star positions. These uses emerged independently across cultures. Trephination. Trephination, drilling holes in living people's skulls, was practiced independently by cultures across the world. Ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, Incas, Polynesians, various African and Asian cultures. No contact between them. Different continents, different time periods, all independently decided to drill holes in skulls of living people, and many patients survived. Skulls show healing, meaning the person lived weeks or months after the procedure. The techniques were similar, using sharpened stones, bronze, or copper tools to scrape or cut circular sections of skull bone, creating holes ranging from small perforations to large openings. The specific tools varied by available materials. The technique was identical. The reasons varied by culture. Some used it medically, treating head injuries, relieving pressure from skull fractures, possibly treating headaches or mental illness. Some used it ritually, creating openings for spirits, marking status or achievement. The purposes differed. The practice was universal. The survival rates were remarkably similar across cultures. Studies of ancient skulls with trephination show 50–90% survival rates depending on the culture and time period. These are good survival rates for brain surgery with stone tools and no antibiotics. Multiple cultures independently developed techniques that worked. The healing shows similar patterns. Bone regrowth around the holes, smooth edges indicating survival for months or years post-surgery. Some skulls show multiple trephinations performed at different times, meaning patients survived the first surgery and voluntarily underwent it again. This is disturbing. Drilling holes in skulls isn't obvious medicine. It's extremely dangerous. Yet multiple isolated cultures independently decided this was a good idea and developed techniques that actually worked often enough to keep doing it. The cognitive leap is identical across cultures. Understanding that opening the skull might relieve pressure, release spirits, or treat conditions. Understanding how to do it without killing the patient. Understanding aftercare to prevent infection. All this knowledge developed independently multiple times. Either there's something fundamental about head injuries that leads to the same treatment approach, or there was far more contact between ancient medical traditions than we know, or humans independently arrive at similar medical solutions when faced with similar problems. The bow and arrow. The bow and arrow was invented independently at least 4 times. In Africa around 64,000 years ago. In Europe around 20,000 years ago. In Asia independently. In the Americas independently. These inventions were separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles. Yet the design converged remarkably. All independently developed similar bow shapes. The basic bow, curved stick with string, appears everywhere. More sophisticated cultures developed recurve bows, bows that curve away from the archer. This design provides more power in a shorter bow. Recurve bows were invented independently in Asia and by Native Americans. Arrow design converged, straight shaft, feather fletching for stability, pointed tip. The materials varied, stone tips in some places, bone or metal in others, but the basic design was identical. A straight projectile with stabilizing fins and a penetrating tip. The physics of archery is universal. A bent stick under tension stores energy. Releasing the string transfers energy to the arrow. Fletching stabilizes flight through aerodynamics. These principles work the same everywhere, but discovering them isn't obvious. Making a functional bow requires understanding wood selection, which woods bend without breaking, which woods store energy well, which woods last longest. Different cultures use different local woods, but independently figured out which properties mattered. Arrow making requires even more precision. Arrows must be straight and balanced, or they don't fly accurately. Fletching must be attached correctly, or arrows tumble. Tips must be properly weighted and attached. All these technical details were worked out independently by isolated cultures. The techniques for using bows also converged. The Mediterranean draw, pulling the string with 3 fingers. The Mongolian draw, using a thumb ring. Different specific techniques, but similar principles of efficient power, transfer, and accuracy. Compound bows, using levers and pulleys for mechanical advantage, were invented independently by modern cultures. The ancient Chinese developed crossbows independently from European crossbow development. Both use similar mechanical principles to achieve higher power with less physical strength. The bow represents one of humanity's most important inventions. It enabled hunting large game at distance, revolutionized warfare, and remained relevant technology for tens of thousands of years. Yet it was invented completely independently, multiple times by cultures with zero contact. 10 technologies reinvented identically by cultures with no contact. Pyramids built using identical mathematical ratios. Writing systems evolving through identical stages. Agriculture developing identical techniques. Zero invented with identical mathematical properties. Mummification using identical preservation methods. The wheel designed with identical mechanical principles. Metallurgy progressing through identical developmental stages. Astronomy discovering identical celestial cycles. Trephination performing identical brain surgeries. Bows and arrows designed with identical physics. These aren't similar innovations, they're identical. Same designs, same techniques, same mathematical principles, same developmental progressions. Created by cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years with absolutely no contact. The standard explanation is convergent evolution. Similar problems produce similar solutions. Human cognition works the same everywhere. Physics and chemistry are universal. Successful technologies converge on similar designs because those designs work best. But this doesn't explain the specific similarities. Pyramids might converge on similar shapes due to structural requirements. But identical cardinal alignments, identical mathematical encoding, identical construction techniques, that's beyond convergent evolution. Writing systems might evolve phonetic components due to cognitive constraints, but identical rebus principles, identical grammatical encoding methods, identical developmental progressions from pictographic to phonetic, that's beyond cognitive constraints. Agriculture might independently discover selective breeding, but identical three-sister polycultures using different plants, identical domestication trajectories for different crops, identical techniques discovered in identical sequences, that's beyond independent discovery. Either there's something guiding human innovation toward specific solutions, some underlying structure of human cognition that inevitably produces identical technologies when certain conditions are met. Or there was far more contact between ancient cultures than we know, transoceanic travel in prehistory, lost civilizations that spread technology, unknown historical connections, or something else is happening, some source of shared knowledge. Some collective human consciousness, some pattern in reality itself that humans independently recognize and exploit. The evidence is undeniable. Isolated cultures invented identical technologies, not just similar, identical in specific details that go far beyond coincidence or convergence. Either human innovation follows predetermined paths, or our understanding of ancient history is fundamentally wrong, or something is guiding isolated cultures toward identical solutions. 10 technologies that shouldn't exist in multiple places, 10 impossible coincidences, 10 demonstrations that human innovation might not be as individual as we think.